Hey there drone fans, Rick here again from Drone Valley. In today's clip, I'd like to cover the top 10 questions you ought to be asking before buying or selling a used drone. Now you might be thinking to yourself, Rick, if I'm selling a drone, why would I have to ask any questions? Don't I just take the guy's money, hand him the drone and let him go off and fly? And I guess that's how most sales go. But the honest truth is, if you're selling a drone, these are great questions to think about before that buyer shows up at your front door and starts firing questions at you, so you have the answers ready, because that's going to make the sale go quicker and probably get you a higher price. But for today's clip, let's assume you're the buyer of a used drone. These are questions you're going to want to ask the seller. Now you might be thinking as well, why would I ever buy a used drone? The honest truth is, you can walk into any store today, buy a new drone, take it out and start flying. But it's going to be more expensive. It hasn't been tested. It came right from the factory in a box. You're opening it up and flying it for the first time. So you're essentially the test pilot. Buying a used drone is going to be less expensive. Buying a used drone from somebody that you know or trust means that they've been the test pilot. So they've had that drone for a year, maybe 2 years, and have flown it. They can give you a lot of history on how the drone handles, if they've had issues with it. So I love the fact that I'm buying a product that's less expensive and tested. And truthfully, in the last 4 years or so, the technology around drones has changed a lot. The cameras have gotten better. A lot more high-end features are built into the drones. But fundamentally, flying this Phantom 3 Pro compared to a Phantom 4 Pro V2 or even a Mavic 2 at this point, 90% of the experience is pretty much the same. It gets you up in the air. You can go to 400 feet. I can go out to end of visual line of sight. I can capture beautiful photos. I can have a wonderful afternoon out flying. This is going to cost me a third of what that brand new Mavic 2 is going to cost me. So as much as I want that and I crave that, this will get me up in the air and do the job. So if you're getting into the hobby, or maybe you've flown less expensive drones or simpler drones and you want to move into the more sophisticated drones, buying a used drone is a really good idea. The trick is knowing which drone to buy, but more importantly, who you buy it from. So these questions are going to help you determine some of the answers you're going to need to know if a drone is really a good deal. Because sometimes the prices seem too good to be true, and they really are, because the drone's got problems. So I'm going to break this into 2 different categories. Then I'll give you some tips at the end around negotiating and sort of what you can do to figure out if a drone's going to be worth the money. The first category is going to be around informational questions you're going to want to ask. And some of these are a little bit trick questions, because if you ask them, you can tell a lot by the way the answers come back from that seller. The second part of it's going to be around the physicality of the drone, because if you're buying a drone, a lot of times, my recommendation is always to go and see the drone in person. But a lot of times that's not possible because you're buying it over the internet from some guy in California. So these questions are ones that you're going to want to get answered about the physical aspects of the drone, and that's going to involve a lot of pictures. So I'll get into that second. And then again, third, I'll come back with some tips. So let's talk about the informational stuff. There's some really basic questions you can ask somebody to determine pretty quickly if the drone's worth your time or not. You want to find out, number one, if they have the original purchase receipt. That's super important. And a lot of times when they buy a drone, like if you buy a DJI drone, they may have bought extended warranty, and sometimes those warranties are transferable. So the first question I'd ask is, when did you buy it? Do you still have the original purchase receipt? And do you have an extended warranty? That's a very simple question for them to answer. They shouldn't have a problem at all sharing that with you, because it really helps their case. If they spend $1,000 on a drone and they're selling it for $600, that raises, in their mind anyway, the value of that drone. The extended warranty is really what I'm after there. The next question I'm going to ask them is, have you registered it with the FAA? Now, that's a trick question, because everybody's supposed to register with the FAA. If I know that he's registered it or she's registered it, that tells me they're a responsible pilot. And just like when you go for insurance and they run your credit score, which doesn't make any sense to me that I'm buying insurance for my car, but in New Jersey, you're running my credit score. How are those two related? Well, running the credit score gives that insurance agent a real good feel of how I handle my money and maybe what kind of driver I'm going to be. So asking them if they got a registration number on the quad tells me they're serious about flying. They're probably going to fly it with a little more care than somebody that decided not to register it or didn't even know they had to register it, which is maybe a weekend flyer. So that question's kind of important to me as well. I also ask, how have you stored the drone? What kind of case do you use? And more importantly, what's included with the sale? So the case is going to tell me how much care they've taken to the drone. So my P3, this P3 here, I've got a beautiful hard case for it. So if anybody asks me, it comes with the case. I can show them the case that it's in. They know that I've taken really good care of it. And I know that it hasn't been thrown in my trunk and bounced around when I'm driving to a location. So that's important. The second part of that question, what's included with the sale, that sets a standard for the negotiations later on the price. So it's not like you're waiting to the end to say what's included and what's the price. If establishing it now, when you've got that initial rapport with the seller of that product, you guys are still friendly, you're still talking, nothing's heading towards a negotiation or kind of a stressful time. So saying, well, what are you including with the sale? Are there extra props? You have extra batteries? Do you have filters for it? Is it coming with the case? You have a second charger? Is there a charger for the car? Do you have landing mat that's coming with it? What are you selling? So they'll list out exactly what's going to come with that product. So you'll get in your mind, you'll get a list. Even better if it's printed out. Whenever I sell a used drone, I have a list ready to say you're getting the Bebop 2 and you're getting extra blades and whatever else I'm selling with it. I hand them the list and say that's the sale price and that's what you're getting included in it. That's good to get out of the way early, because later when you get into negotiations, it's hard for them to say, oh no, I'm not going to give you 3 batteries, I'm going to give you 2 batteries. So get that out of the way early. The next question has to do with, why are you selling it? I want to know why you're selling the drone. Are you upgrading to something better? And if you are upgrading to something better, let me ask you a few questions about that to see if that's really the truth, or you're just kind of using that as a sales technique. If, for example, I'm selling a P3 and I say, I've been in love with that brand new Mavic 2 Zoom. I have to have it. I love the foldability of it. I love to take it on trips. I love the fact that I've got the mechanical lens where I can do the optical zoom on things. I kind of know that seller is telling me an honest truth. They've done the research on the new quad. They really are going for an upgrade. But if I get an answer back of like, nah, we didn't fly it that much, the kids didn't really like it, we flew it a few times and it's been on a shelf ever since, that's kind of a warning sign to me a little bit. And I know it's not true for everybody, and none of these questions or answers that I get back are true for everybody, right? But I've got to add it into the mix when I'm analyzing what the seller's got in his hands. And somebody telling me they've only flown it a few times means that the initial thrill of it is worn off. And what tends to happen with people that fly a drone and get bored with it is they start to do crazy things with the drone. So they're going to see how high they can fly it, how far they can fly it, how close to that tree can I get it, can I buzz the neighbor's cat with it? And that kind of dangerous flight, or that kind of, I don't know, interesting flight can put the drone at risk. So that tells me a little bit about it. So he hasn't registered it. He only flew it a couple of times. They got bored with it. Those are kind of telltales for me that I might be a little bit sketchy on as far as buying the product. Where have you flown? It's important too, because if you've flown it locally, I kind of want to know where you flew it. Did you fly it down at the lake? Could it have taken a dip? Have you flown it at the shore a lot? Is there a lot of chance of salt or sand getting in the drone? Have you flown it around your backyard? Have you flown it with a flying club? Oh, that's interesting. Where do you guys fly? So just, it's a conversational technique that you have to bond with the customer, because the negotiations are coming later, and the closer you get to that person as a friendship through this conversation around drones really can help you in the negotiations later. But more importantly, it tells you maybe the possible abuse that drone has taken at the hands of that particular seller. And again, none of these are panaceas. All of these are little bits of data you put together to sort of decide if you're going to buy the drone or not. The last question I talk about is the firmware. What version of firmware you're on. And if I find out you're 3 revs back, that's a pretty bad sign. That means you're not involved with the hobby, you're not involved with the product, you don't stay on top of things. Now, I'm not saying you've got to jump to every new version of firmware that comes out, but I want to know that you've got at least a debate about that to say, well, I've heard with the new version of firmware that it breaks the return to home accuracy of the landing, or I've heard people having issues with compass going out of round or something with the new version of firmware. So it's part of a conversation to say, I'm kind of sizing you up as a seller. Do I believe that you're responsible with the drone? Are you telling me things that would scare me a little bit as a responsible pilot? And all that comes into play, not necessarily that I won't buy the quad, but it might impact my ability to give you exactly what you're asking for with the quad later on as far as the price goes. I may at that point want to negotiate a little harder because I'm taking a bigger risk. So it's always honest answers and good answers versus what am I going to pay for the drone. And that's the fun part of negotiating on used drones, because one thing you have to remember is if you show up at somebody's door and you've got cash in your pocket, it's a buyer's market at that point. It's not a seller's market. Now, the seller might think, there's hundreds of buyers out there. The honest truth is there probably are, but they're not standing at your doorstep with cash in your pocket. So as a buyer, you really have the leverage at that point to negotiate, because don't fall in love with the drone. If you get there and you say to yourself, man, I love this P3, I have to get this drone. I'm going home with this today. I can already in my mind think I'm going to be flying this afternoon. You're doomed at that point. So don't fall in love with the drone. Remember that this is one of probably 100 drones exactly like that are for sale right now. And there may be another buyer that throws in an extra battery or is a little bit more reliable or is taking better care of it. So when you get there, be as agnostic as you can, be as abstract as you can with it, because you're buying a product that you're going to fly for a long time. So that last question about firmware upgrades kind of tells me a little more about your responsibility as a flyer. So those are kind of informational things. And a lot of times I'll get those questions answered over the phone or through an email, and the questions come back, the answers come back from them and they're satisfactory. And then I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm coming on Saturday to take a look at it if that's okay with you, if the guy's located close enough to me. And I always mention I'm coming with cash to buy the drone. So if we negotiate and you want to sell it that day, I'll be there with cash. Now that excites the buyer, I should say, excites the seller to say, the guy's serious, he's going to be here Saturday. In their minds, in most cases, they're already spending that money. Whether it's going towards the upgrade drone they're going to be buying, or it's going to pay a bill somewhere, they've already sold that drone, which helps you later in the negotiation. So those are kind of the informational ththings that I would ask. Now we'll get into the physical stuff. Now, before I get too deep into the physical questions, the best way to buy a drone is one that's within 3 feet of you, right? You want to put your hands on it. You want to make sure things are working. You want to make sure it looks good. And you're getting the drone that you saw in the pictures. The worst place you can buy a drone is from some guy you've never met in California over the internet. Now, I'm not saying you can't get good deals over the internet. I'm sure there are a lot of responsible buyers and sellers that exchange drones for money over the internet. But for me, every drone I've bought used has been one that I'm willing to drive to take a look at, because I may drop $500 on a drone or $1,000 on a drone. That's a big expense. I want to make sure that I'm buying something that I can lay my hands on, physically inspect, and know that I'm getting a really good deal. So my recommendation would be, if you're thinking about buying a drone, especially something more than a couple $100s, you want to be in front of that drone and you want to have your cash in hand so you can make that transaction pretty quickly. All right, so some of the physical questions I'd ask, how many flights have you had with the drone? Now, I'm already going to verify this later, so I'm hoping you're going to be honest, because if you tell me you've only flown it a couple of times, and I open up the DJI Go app for this guy, and I look in there and I see the battery's been charged 115 times, now I don't trust you. Now I get issues, right? So I ask those questions not to entrap you, but again, we're having a conversation. I want to sort of get to know you. Are you an honest guy? Am I buying the right drone from the right guy? So answer that question. Have you had any crashes or repairs? Now, crashes are something that happen a lot. And it doesn't mean to me that I won't buy the drone. I mean, I've bought drones before where somebody's been very honest and said, yeah, I crashed it. Matter of fact, I crashed this P3, and I'll show you how I can verify that in a second. But crashing a drone doesn't mean that it's doomed forever, or being repaired doesn't mean it's doomed forever, but it's just another factor to consider, because if you crash the drone, how did it happen? Did you hit a tree? Did you run it into a wall? Was it 400 feet up all the way down on a hard pavement? So those are really basic questions. But now, knowing that you crashed the drone or had repairs to the drone, I'm going to spend a little bit more time on the next part of it, which is the physical inspection. Now, if you're doing this remotely, you're going to have to ask for pictures. So I would ask for pictures at a bare minimum of the motors, of the arms in particular, and certainly of the gimbal assembly. Those are the 3 things I ask for right out of the gate. Give me all 4 motors from the top, and I want to have decent pictures so I can look and see if there's any oxidation in the motors, if there's any rust or any kind of damage to the motors. I want to make sure the arms aren't damaged, because when you crash a drone like this is going to take most of the impact. You're going to run into something. These are going to get damaged along the edge. And again, of course, the gimbal is really important. I also ask if they can shoot a video of just powering up the drone. So if I'm not physically in front of it to do it myself, I want them to power up the drone, because I want to watch that gimbal go through its power on self-test routine and end up facing forward exactly like that. I want to see the motors kind of tickle like this for a second and stay still. I might even have them start up the drone and have it sit there at idle, just so I can listen to it to hear if something's a little bit wonky in the drone. So those are some of the basic things I'd ask there. The next thing I would talk about is the single points of failure. And I'd mentioned before that the motors are a single point of failure. If you have a bad motor or prop is damaged, you're going to have issues. The drone's coming out of the sky. Now, the props are not a big deal. Whenever I buy a used drone, honestly, I take the props off I bought it with, throw those out, and start with fresh props. But the motors are super important. So if I'm in front of the drone, I'm going to actually take the props off each of the motors, and I'm going to spin it with my fingers. And you should feel that motor spin pretty smoothly. You're going to have to find any dry spots on there, no rough spots when you're spinning it. And I'll do that to all the motors. So I'll go to each one of them, and I'll spin those motors and make sure to get the props off them. Spin those motors and make sure that I've got smooth movement on all the motors, so that when I take it home, I'm not going to have to change the motor. And you can feel it after a while. You can feel if there's dry spots on those motors. So check that out. And then ultimately, power the unit up. Let it go through power on self-test. And like I said, observe how the gimbal's moving. Make sure that the gimbal rests in a position that's horizontal. If you can turn on the application through his phone, or if you want to bring your own tablet with you and test it, make sure you've got a clean picture. You can examine the lens, make sure there's no chips on the lens. The batteries are another single point of failure that I spend a lot of time with. So what I tend to do when I buy a used drone is I'll spin it up with all the batteries he's got. So if he's selling me 5 batteries with it, I make sure that the batteries, number 1, can be charged. So I check for at least 1 light to make sure that I can charge them. I want to inspect them physically to make sure there's no gouges in the batteries, that they're not swollen. Run your fingers along it. And what's interesting is a lot of people think your sight is your most honed sense. When you're looking at something, you can tell. Actually, your fingertips are your best. So I tend to fondle things a lot when I'm out there inspecting a drone, because the temperament of your fingers, the actual tolerance your fingers can feel, is pretty great. So if you've got a bubble in a battery, this one doesn't have one, but I've had batteries go bad, you can feel that bubble and you know right away, okay, that battery's not one I'm going to ever fly with. But again, it's not like I wouldn't buy the drone because of one bad battery, but I want to make sure they all work. And then I'll run through the power on self-test with all 4 or 5 drone batteries, whatever he's going to be selling with it, just to make sure they all power up and everything is good, and I know the batteries are good, because used batteries work well, but they're expensive. So if I buy this thing and I think I'm getting 5 batteries and I get it home and it turns out 3 of them are kind of flaky, I didn't get such a great deal. All right, so the last thing I'll talk about is sort of the physical inspection of the case. And that's really important. And I'll do some close-ups of this one because I mentioned that I crashed this one already. I actually hit a tree with this thing so hard about 1.5 years ago that I cracked this top frame. Now, I changed that top frame. I fixed it myself and changed it. But if you're buying the drone from me, you're going to say, Rick, have you had any crashes? Yeah, I had a crash. Did you send it for repairs? No, I repaired it myself and I changed that top case. If I lied to you, which I would never do, but if I did and said, no, I haven't had any crashes and there's no issues with it, you'd know immediately when you inspect this because DJI puts labels across the top of it on purpose that I didn't change. So I slit these labels with a razor blade to pull his top case off to change it. Well, you'll see right away that those labels have been sliced. You'll also notice pretty closely that I had some issues putting it back on, and one of these edges right here, I think, yeah, isn't completely seated. So you'll notice that when you look at it. So physical inspection is important, and more specifically in the physical inspection, look for the seams. Where things come together, you want to look and make sure you've got tight seams all along. You also want to check for water intrusion, because if somebody's flown it in the snow or the rain, you might see streaks on there where the water has left corrosion trails or whatever on the unit itself. You'll see debris coming out of the vents. So check all that stuff physically. I mean, it's common sense things that you're doing, but take your time, because another indicator you might be getting into trouble buying a used drone is if the seller's in a hurry. So if you get there and the seller says to you, look, I haven't got a lot of time, I got an appointment this afternoon, or I got to meet the wife or whatever, so let's get this over with. At that point, I almost get back in the car and say, thanks anyway, I'm good, because you rushing me is not a good thing. This is an expensive proposition for me. Again, a couple $100 is a big deal. We're going to be here a little while, maybe a half an hour before we make the decision on this is the right drone for me. So do the physical inspection. You know, and again, I've bought and sold a lot of used drones over the years. I love upgrading and trying new things, so I tend to buy a lot of used drones from people. All of them have different peculiarities about what you're going to inspect, but the seams are important, and again, look for any kind of water intrusion. Now, both of these are in great shape because I keep them in hard cases, I keep them clean, I wipe them down after I bring them back. That's the kind of drone you want to buy at the end of the day. So make sure you ask the questions up front. That'll kind of set the stage for how tough you're going to be on some of the other questions. Go through the physical inspections. One thing I did forget on the batteries, in the DJI Go 4 app, you can actually go in there and see the health of the batteries. Most of them are a 3 or 4 cell battery. You want to, when you turn on the application, look at each battery individually, make sure the cells are pretty evenly balanced across the top. If you have one cell that's low, it'll power up and you won't know it, but you'll have one cell that won't charge correctly. So you want to make sure you check that. That application, if you scroll up, also lets you know how many times the battery's been charged. So like I said before, if he said, you know, if he gave you the old, was owned by an old lady who drove it on Sundays, and you check it, it's got 100 charges in the battery, pretty good chance he's been flying that thing an awful lot. Not that that's a big deal, but it's something you want to know. All right, so that's enough for the physical and the informational. Now let's talk a little bit about negotiating tips. Now, I'm not a big fan of trying to rip anybody off. I've never been happy with doing that. I feel like the best deal that I've ever made leaves you happy, leaves me happy. Maybe leaves both of us a little unhappy, that I didn't get quite the price I wanted, you didn't get quite the price you wanted, but both of us got pretty much what we wanted. But negotiation's a delicate art. So one of the techniques I use when I negotiate is I use the 80-10-10 rule, which means if I'm going to buy this drone, you're telling me it's $1,000, in my mind, I'm going to have 80% of that in my front pocket. So $1,000 drone, 80% is about $800. I'll have $800 in cash in my front pocket. I'll have another $100 in my back pocket. I'll have the last $100 in this pocket. So if I get there and it's $1,000, take it or leave it, and I really feel like it's a good deal, I'll take out all the money and I'll pay you. But I like to have that 80% ready so that if I say to you, look, I really want the drone, you really want to sell the drone, it's a beauty, I can't afford $1,000, and you know I can go as high as 800. The guy might say at that point, look, 800 will take it. 800 bucks cash, you're good to go. You pull it out, nobody's embarrassed. You have $800. You could even say, I've only got 800 with me. Will you go for 800? That's your opening gambit. Now, if the guy goes, no, that's ridiculous, it's way too low, I'll never go for 800 bucks. Okay, no problem. What do you think's a fair price? That's a negotiation. He's expecting it or she's expecting it, you're expecting it. And honestly, for me, it's kind of the fun of the deal, right? I already know I want the drone. Now it's just a matter of what are we going to exchange for me to get that drone? So the 800 starts the conversation. If he says, look, I wanted 1,000, you wanted 800, let's settle at 900. No problem, I get 8 here. I got 100 back here. I have the last 100 back here if I need it, but separating it that way, for me anyway, physically, it kind of puts me in the mindset of like, I'm spending $800 in that drone, you try and talk me into why I'd want to spend more than that, right? So I kind of put it on him. And remember what I said early, that you're in a position of strength there because you're a guy who's at his door that wants that product he's got, and you've got cash with you. So that kind of slants things a little bit in your favor because he isn't going to have 12 other people ringing his doorbell that afternoon. It's not like he's got some rare drone, there's only 12 of them in the world. He's got a drone that there's probably 100 of them for sale at any given moment within a 100-mile radius of them. So you're in a position to negotiate. So what I would say is, be gentle but negotiate firmly. So if you've got a price in your mind that you want to spend for that drone and your budget only permits a certain amount, if you're way below what he's asking, you might want to tell him on the phone, look, I can't possibly sell it for $1,000 or buy it for $1,000. Would you consider 600? And if he says to you, look, man, that's way too low. If you can come up to 8, maybe we'll do it. Then you can decide, am I going to put the rest of that money together, or is this a deal that I shouldn't really have any involvement in, or maybe save your money. The other thing is, I'd like to do comparisons. I like to know before I go to buy a drone what a used P3 runs for right now. So I can do my homework, get on eBay, get on a lot of the different boards and find out if people are selling P3, a P3 Advanced like this guy, what are they selling for? Are they selling for 300 and the guy's asking 600? He's way out of band. So if there's a lot of accessories, maybe it makes sense to have the 600. If he's selling it with a case and batteries and a landing mat, maybe those extras are worth it. But having that number in my head to say, look, I've been doing a lot of research on this. This drone right now from other buyers is around a $350 drone. I might go 400, but I'm not going 600. So it at least gives you a position of rational conversation where you're not just pulling a number out of thin air because you've made it up. Last thing I'll tell you, the best advice I can give you about buying a used drone is typically who you buy it from. Now, my recommendation is always, we all fly together, we have friends that fly. Buying a drone from a friend is the best thing you can do. The next best thing you can do is buying it from some reputable organization. Like I fly with a club in New Jersey, a lot of flyer clubs out there. If you don't fly with a club, there's probably a club in your neighborhood, or there's an AMA club in your neighborhood. Look them up. There's always people in those clubs that are selling drones. So a friend would be first, a club member would be second, because honestly, there's peer pressure there that if they sell you a drone that's a piece of junk and you come back and start complaining, they're going to be embarrassed with the other club members. So they tend to be very honest. Plus, in general, I know this sounds crazy, but I find flyers to be very honest people. I've flown for a long time. I've never, ever had a bad deal on a drone. I'm not saying it can't happen, but the flyers tend to be pretty honest. So a friend would be best, a club would be second, third would be like a local hobby shop. Now, you don't really know the hobby shop, but they tend to, take care of stuff. They want you to come back as a customer and buy accessories and buy props and all the rest of the stuff you need. So they're going to be honest. The last place I'd go would be like one of the boards, maybe, or some internet auction site like eBay or Craigslist or one of those. I don't think you need to go that far out to find the drone you want. I guarantee you a friend owns one, somebody in the club owns one, or a hobby shop will have access to one, or check the papers. You might find somebody locally. But that's the spectrum of trust, I guess I'll call it, where I trust friends. I don't trust the internet, some guy in California on eBay selling a drone, because I'm not that desperate. I can find it locally and probably get my hands on it to test it. So that's pretty much it for today. So hopefully you found this information helpful. I love putting these clips together, and if I can help one of you guys enjoy this hobby a little bit better, that's why I'm posting them. If you have any questions about anything I've covered today, please drop them in the comments below, and I promise to get back to you as quickly as I can. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, hit that subscribe button down there and turn the bell on. I have a lot more content coming over the next couple of weeks you're going to want to see, so make sure you subscribe to the channel and join the Drone Valley family. You're not going to want to miss any of it. And if you've got suggestions on questions you guys ask when you're buying a used drone, drop those in the comments below as well, because we're in that time of the year where people are starting to think about getting outside and flying. The warm weather's just around the corner. And my recommendation is always don't wait to fly. Take whatever budget you've got, find a drone you can afford, buy that drone, get those batteries charged, and the first sunny day that comes up where it's in the 60s, get outside and just enjoy flying, because for me, this hobby is liberating, it's inspirational, and I know you're going to feel the same thing. So if you're thinking about getting into the hobby, take whatever you've got cash-wise, find a drone, find the right drone, fly that drone. Just have a lot of fun, because summer's coming and it's going to be a wild year for us. So thanks again for watching, and until next time, happy flying.